Hello, everybody. Hey, VC. Mark over here at Twanger's Turntable. I hope you're all doing well. Happy New Year's to all those that I haven't been on here for a little while, a couple of weeks, in fact. But just busy with work, life, family, the things that are, affording me to have this hobby to start with, right? And it is a hobby, hence the reason why I may only put a video up once a week, once every other week, just when time allows. It is a hobby. I love it. I love what I've encountered in the VC and experienced. But as I've mentioned before, I'm a relatively solitary dude. I enjoy my music typically by myself or with my bestie Jen, as you saw in my video. What this video is for, I just wanted to get on here, and it's sort of a shout out. It's really about what the VC has brought to me. I was part of YouTube community as an observer for a while, a couple of years at least. But then I started this channel just over a year ago. And what it's done for me is opened up music that I had not encountered before, just wasn't in my wheelhouse. So to give you an idea, I grew up in the 70s and 80s. I was the sixth child in a family of seven children, so there was 9 of us in our home. So I had a lot of siblings that were into varying types of music. I tended to lean towards the hard rock metal and really got into the metal in the 80s, early 80s. So I was part of at least a fan of the new wave of British heavy metal scene and all that scene. And of course, the hard rock of North America, predominantly the US, but of course there was some odd bands here in Canada. Well, they weren't necessarily odd, but some really good rock bands here in Canada. Triumph, Rush, Helix. You may have heard of a few of those. Kick-Axe, on and on and on. But I kind of, as life kind of evolved organically, I grew up, moved on to becoming more of a family-oriented person, and really was away from not away from the music scene. I was still purchasing music, but it evolved into something where I wasn't paying attention to what was happening really in specifically the hard rock and metal community, although I was still following the newer acts, but it's such a vast thing. I mean, I couldn't follow everything. It was just busy. It was a busy time. I was going to college at the time, or basically technical school in the early 90s and whatnot. So after the 80s, my life changed drastically as far as what my focus was, what my primary focus was. That's all it was. So, and then, years later, our son is out on his own. We've got grandkids and whatnot. And it's just Jen and I, my bestie, and our home. And I still love music. Music is so huge in my life and in her life as well. We share that. It's a commonality we have. It's one of our things that, we see eye to eye on. We can share that. But in the vinyl community and YouTube, started to see other channels. And so I'm going to shout out some channels here, and there's so many more. So if I'm not omitting anyone intentionally, I just can't list them all. But these are some of the ones that come to mind because I frequent them a lot, or I've connected with them in some manner with these artists that I'm going to talk about. And then there's the ones that have just been so supportive in ways and sharing their knowledge. John over at Bip Bop Boom, Patrick at Vinyl Archivist, Rachel at Rachel's Ghost, all those, the usual suspects that most of the VC is aware of, just because they're so knowledgeable. And I'm not. I mean, I like to present what I have in my collection. I have, it's kind of like, I used to hear this adage, the older I get and the more I know, the more I find out I don't know. It's that kind of thing. There's so much to know. So, and some of these other channels, I'm going to shout them out because, certain bands that I'd maybe thought I'd put behind me, maybe grew up, I'm too mature for that or whatever. You know what? It's still good, fun music. And so a couple of those, like Kiss in my life as a child, was huge. Every young person in the 70s and early 80s, I would suggest, were at least aware of Kiss, and at least the circles I frequented were fans of Kiss, everything they did essentially. But it's kind of like, I haven't been a huge fan for many years of the stuff they've done. But one of the channels I'm going to mention, I got to put my glasses on for this because I'm blind. Aaron Mutha Alamir. He's a huge Kiss fan, right? And so I watch a lot of Aaron's videos. I watch his Tipsy Tuesdays. Just a great guy. He showed me out on several occasions. And recently he'd been talking about this record here. So I decided to go and get it. And it's Creatures of the Night, Kiss. And this is the one they put out in 82, is it? Yeah, 82. See, I'm I was a wannabe drummer. I still play. It's just fun, something to do. Never was that great at it. But I was a huge fan of Peter Criss as a kid. Just one of those drummers. And this, I don't know. I'll defer to Aaron and those Kiss fans. This, to me, is almost like one of their heaviest drum sounding albums that I know of. And it's Eric Carr, I think. I should know that, yeah. It's really good, and these are the things I want to share is my appreciation, and what I'm gaining from being part of the VC, and that's one of them. And while I'm talking about Aaron, he showed this album last week, I believe, or the week before, and I was mentioning to him how mine is different. It's got a darker blue cover to it than the one he had. Maybe his is a U.S. pressing. This is a Canadian pressing. But just a neat little thing, another thing we share in the VC, the differences with pressings and plants that maybe they come from, the artwork, who knows. Another one is Josh over at the Flip Side Vinyl. I'm pulling it up here because I don't have these memorized. But yeah, the Flip Side Vinyl Community with JC. Josh. Now, he's always got lots of content, and he's right on top of things about new releases and whatnot, things that are being reissued, which brings to mind, I just heard some terrible news. Not really, but I was watching a Tony Iommi video, and he's talking about, the reissues they did last year with Heaven and Hell, Mob Rules, fantastic albums, Sabbath. So he was talking about things they may be working on this year, and it's all the Tony Martin era, which, all due respect, that's great, just not my thing. But he didn't mention anything about Born Again, with Ian Gillan. So anyway, I digress. So one of the things that I've seen Josh mention a couple of times, I think he's a fairly big, here's that term again, hair metal, but glam metal fan, metal, heavy metal in general, but that era of the Warrant, the Poison, all that stuff. And one of the bands I put into that, which is not fair. That's inherently, it's going to be, it's not fair to put people in or bands in a box like that. But one of them was Dokken, and so I actually have one of their albums, and I didn't know it. It's just a box of albums I got from a guy. I've told the story. It was there was about 100 LPs in there, and this was one of them. And I don't even have the cover. I just have the inner sleeve and the actual vinyl itself. And it's Back for the Attack, Dokken. And, Patrick was also playing it a while back over at the Vinyl Archivist, and we were talking about that. And my buddies and I, we never really considered them metal. And I may have been misunderstood when I was discussing that. I wasn't saying they sounded like Bon Jovi at all. We just put a lot of those bands in that same box like we used to do at the time. Unfortunately, it was just the way it was. And they weren't in our wheelhouse, but that's a really good record, actually. And so, those are some of the things I'm getting from the VC. A year into this is it just expands one's musical, for lack of a better word, musical horizons, even though I knew they existed. And I always also want to, one of the other gentlemen here is David over at the Garage Geek. He does a lot of these, or was doing. He did one of mine before on the Rainbow debut, which I think I may have been misunderstood there too. It's not my favorite Rainbow. It's just because I didn't have it on vinyl and I really wanted to get it on vinyl. My favorite one would be Rainbow Rising. But I think you should check this out, David, because I think you mentioned before you had not heard this album, and it's by Chris de Burgh, and it's Spanish Train and Other Stories. I grew up with this, so I don't know. I mean, it's always been in my life, so I don't have an unbiased opinion of it. I just think it's a great album. It's not hard rock, it's not metal, it's nothing that would normally be in my wheelhouse. It's just that I grew up with, and I think you should check it out, David, and do one of your little recommendation videos. I'd be curious to see what you think of it. It's a great album, and I think once maybe you have heard it, and maybe I misunderstood. I thought you had mentioned you had not heard of that record. And the last one I'm going to do, I was going to do a video dedicated to just this band, but I'm not going to do that. Sorry, Malaya. I just don't have enough to put into a video like that. But one of those bands I was into on the peripheral. They were there. And in fact, their second album, I didn't even know about for many, many years, although having heard it now, or not now, but not that long ago, I had a cassette, like many of myself and my friends had, of mixed songs we would make for each other, of our artists and whatnot. There was no internet back then, folks. Yeah, no internet. Essentially, most of the info we got was word of mouth from other people listening to bands. I happened to grow up close to a Canadian Forces base, so there was a lot of people, not transient, but yeah. I mean, they were much more worldly. They'd lived at different bases over in Germany and throughout the world, and they'd bring music to our little village that I'd never heard of. Or there was the Hit Parade or the Circus, those magazines, So I digress. So there was a cassette I had of multiple artists, and a friend had made for me, and only had the list of the song titles, not the artists. And I'm sure at one time I probably knew who they were, but there was this one song on there, and I didn't know who it was, and I didn't recognize it, strangely enough, because I had their debut album. So that record is, and you'll see it in another video I'm going to post for my Vinyl Tag 2023 for Rob Walker, but is this band, Girl. So I'm sure others in the VC have covered this, including Malaya. Malaya's played it. I think she did a needle drop on this one a couple of months back. It's got Phil Collen, who would go on to play with Def Leppard, and the dude for LA Guns. The vocalist that would go on to LA Guns, Phil Lewis is his name. That's another band. See, I'd like to check out some of their stuff. Is LA Guns, but this is their debut. They only did 2 studio albums. They did a couple of live albums. This is from 1980. Yeah, Philip Lewis here, and there's Phil Collen, who went on to play with Def Leppard. That's their debut, and then so I knew of them, had them in my catalog. The other song that I was alluding to that was on a cassette that I didn't know who the band was. I should have known, but there was so many different bands, and honestly, several of them sounded very similar to me, and this was how we would share bands. This was bands we may not heard of, so why the title of the artist wasn't on there, I don't know, but it wasn't. And it was their second album, Wasted Youth, and the song was actually Wasted Youth. Now, if you've not heard it, go check it out. To me, I remember thinking, wow, that sounds like Diamond Head in the riff for Am I Evil? And this was before Metallica had done it. So, not when it initially starts, but when when the main riff comes in, I think you'll recognize it when you hear it. At least recognize it as being a very similar riff. Now that the music world is full of that, right? You can make comparisons all over the place. I mean, I've made comparisons with Black Sabbath and Cliff Richard. So I mean, there's if you listen to enough music, you're going to make those comparisons. But anyway, it's a great band that had very little recognition, and I, just think they're a good rock band from that era, the early 80s hard rock. And another one we were talking about just last week. And here's another thing I want to mention. It's inherently dangerous going on these live stream chats at 1 in the morning after you've had a really long day. Your mind is just fried. And so there's so much going on there, and my 50-some-year-old brain cannot keep up to all the chat that's happening. And so we were talking about Judas Priest, and I had requested a song, Beyond the Realms of Death from Stained Class. But there was also a lot of chat going on about Point of Entry and Defenders of the Faith and British Steel and all this stuff. And for me, it got pretty confusing. I'm talking about Dave Holland. Somebody else is talking about Les Binks. And I think in that conversation, John had asked who the drummer was for that song. And I totally, oh, that's Dave Holland. And, anyway, that stuff happens. And normally that doesn't bother me. If it was The Cure or somebody that I don't know anything about, I wouldn't lose any sleep over it. But I swear, this is one of the things when you're a music fan, I think people will relate, and you love a band the way I do with Maiden, Priest, Metallica, all those bands, and the perception may be that you didn't know who the drummer was. It bugs me. And so I come on here, and I've been a Priest fan my almost entire life, right? It's just been one of those bands that's there. And of course, in my this is actually a Gold Records release. It's not an official Priest release. They don't recognize it. That Hero album, it's the greatest hits. Well, it's not even the greatest hits. It's basically the first two albums. And of course, there's the one in question with Les Binks. There's 3 albums with him. This one, and what we referred to as Hellbent for Leather here, but it's known as Killing Machine now. This is the reissue. And then he did, their live album, Beast in the East. But this is where Dave Holland's stepped in, and this was the British Steel album, the Record Store Day one. I got a couple. It actually sounds really good. I don't like this plastic sleeve stuff. I wish I had the old original sleeve like I had. I've got it on every other format. And then, of course, Point of Entry is actually a really good album. It's underappreciated, I think. Solar Angels, just an incredible song. And then for the longest time, I think this was probably my favorite Priest album, at least back then in the 80s. I tend to lean more towards the 70s stuff now. And funny enough, that stuff with Les Binks probably is my favorite. Although, it's hard to say. Again, me and trying to pick favorites it could be different tomorrow. And of course, this is where it stopped for me. I did have Turbo initially, but just not a big fan of it. So, Defenders of the Faith was the last one in my catalog. And that's it. Some of the people in the VC that I kind of admire and respect their opinions or whatnot. I'm only doing this because of that. Shout outs and just the cheers, you guys. It's been awesome doing this with you, learning from you, sharing with you. And I hope to continue to do it for some time yet. It is 2023. We're going into a new year. I will post my vinyl tag, and I'm going to keep it at under 20 minutes here. So I better hurry up. I'm almost 19. Cheers, everyone. I hope you're doing well. Thanks for tuning in and subscribing if you've already done so. If not, please do so. Hit the like button. And I'll see you next time here at Twanger's Turntable. Take care, everyone. All you others in the VC, again, thanks. 2 thumbs up. You're all awesome. Cheers, everyone. Bye.